Welcome to this live talk about non duality. I'm Russ Rapp, and today in this message, we're going to talk about oneness experience and what that is in relation to non duality. So, before we begin, I didn't schedule this talk ahead of time, so you may just be getting a notification now if you're subscribed to my channel. And that's kind of how life works is sometimes things pop up that you're not expecting or you can't plan for everything, so you just have to go with the flow, roll with the punches. And so that's where we are here in this moment, the moment that never quite arrives. And if you're new to non-duality, I have other videos that you can check out that will explain the topic or the concepts in a little bit more detail. Um, the best way to get involved in these discussions is to subscribe to my channel. Um, I also made a video. So, this talk today is going to be geared towards people that are a little bit more familiar with non duality. Obviously, if you're new, the word means not to, it's pointing to the illusion of separation. But I just put out my most recent uploaded video is called The Big Lie of Non-Duality. And it's only about a minute and a half long, so it's really short. And it does I like it. I think it does a pretty good job of laying out the big lie of non-duality. So if you have not seen that yet, go check out that video. It's my most recent one, and I told my son that I think that it's going to probably be the top 3 of my videos that I've created over the last, I don't know, how long have we been doing this? 3 years? And so, like I said, it's geared towards people that are familiar with it. And I think that you will maybe find some value in that. So check that out. And part of the reason why I bring that up at the beginning of this video is this discussion is geared towards this need or desire or people who seek to experience non-duality as something tangible, something experiential, or something that you can become, or um, however you want to describe it, a falling away of the self, a merging with existence or reality. And it came from, I like, if you're joining here in this live talk, feel free to add comments, questions in the chat. So I'll try to get to those at some point. But if you're just popping on because you just saw it, welcome. And we may be having stragglers coming in throughout the video. But I like your comments, and a lot of my motivation or inspiration for making these videos comes from things that I get from people who watch my videos, because it's kind of geared towards maybe something that you're dealing with or something that you're wondering about or struggling with, or comes from, constructive or maybe not as constructive criticism of my presentation of this information, if you want to call it that. It's not really information, I guess. It's just something that's obvious to everyone. And most people can relate to it better just by saying, like, what's his face? That one guy. The power of now. Eckhart Tolle says, the power of now being presence in the moment. And people can understand that conceptually easier because we can understand when we're disconnected or we're not paying attention or we're not fully aware of what's happening in the moment. And so there's this sense of being or presence or grounding in what appears to be happening through this idea of being in the moment, living in the moment, being in the here and now. So, in a sense, that's easier to digest as far as understanding what the point is trying to get across. When we talk about non-duality, it's kind of pointing to the duality that we put ourselves in, that we are immersed in as a apparent separate self. And so, when we talk about non-duality, we point in the direction of oneness, if you want to call it that, by pointing out the two-ness, the duality that seems to exist in every moment. So people can see this idea of a moment, that I can be in it or out of it, and they grasp onto that as something that they want to strive for. But ultimately, the message of non-duality and oneness is that you can never really be out of that moment. You can seem to be, but the moment is always ever present. It is what is. That never changes. And that's something we can understand on some level in every moment, because it's always available. Whether you realize or recognize it or not, it's always there. And it's always available. So meaning, regardless of the time frame or your mindset, you have the ability to see through the veil of illusion and see the reality of life. So without further ado, it's a little bit of a introduction to the talk about oneness experience in non-duality. So the question is, what is a oneness experience? And that's a question that is I don't have the immediate answer to, because I don't really know. I mean, part of it is how we would describe that uh, as individuals. In listening to the message from Eagle Brook Church this morning, I was talking about wisdom and Proverbs and King Solomon and kind of his messaging through that book in the Bible. And and one of the things, the statements that a wise person could say is, I don't know, because we don't necessarily understand everything. We're always learning, and if you're open to other perspectives or advice or wisdom from other people, then you are acting in a way that is a wise person. And so I don't really know. I guess I will read the comment from which video? The best method to experience non-duality. So that is my most popular video. Perhaps you found my channel through that video. It's got way more views than my other videos. And I think it gets to the core of the need of this community, or this niche of like-minded people, of seeking to have somehow embody or experience what non-duality is trying to say. Because part of wisdom is not just listening to advice or listening to podcasts or watching YouTube videos or reading books. It's about putting that into action, applying it to your life, and that sort of thing. So that's kind of the pragmatic way that people come to the subject when they learn about it, is, how do I put this into practice? How do I make this work? How do I um, what sort of things can I do to encompass or embody non-duality? So it's on my best method to experience non-duality, and the comment comes from Bronson Stone. And I read this because I like input that is thoughtful and challenging, and I think Bronson does a good uh, way of kind of mapping out something that would be beneficial in discussing. So Bronson says, "Wow, way too many individuals think they understand non-duality. They say it's always here. It's not an experience. Blah blah blah. Know this to be true. Any change is an experience. This is pretty much the definition of experience, isn't it? A change was perceived. Now, when you become absorbed into the oneness, which can be through a variety of ways, but just say by focusing on the sense of beingness. If your mind is focusing very well but remains relaxed, it can become single pointed. This then leads to the stillness of mind, reason being, while focusing on the one feeling, other thoughts just fade away. When the stillness is sufficient, you will experience what is commonly referred to as the veil being removed. This is actually the moment you are absorbed into the one. Another term is samadhi. This will present you with a very different worldview, and it is a real shift in perception, not a flowery statement. Your view will be that you are everything, not as an idea that you have intellectually come to understand, but a reality that you experience firsthand. You are not the body, but because your perception is from the body perspective, you are caught in the illusion. So when the perception shifts to everything, including the space, you will know firsthand and not as a concept or idea. So I like what Bronson says there as far as this idea of experiencing some form of what non-duality is pointing to, or oneness, as Bronson puts. I said, sounds great, and then Bronson replied, hi there, yes, it most certainly is. It can be described similar to a trauma because no matter when you experience it, you will never forget it. It is etched into your you-ness. Smiley face. I am now 57. My first oneness experience was when I was 11. I still remember it as if it was yesterday. The second time I was 49, but it was much bigger and lasted 3 hours. Even Arahant Buddhist monks will use this amongst other factors to gauge a person's authenticity. And then I replied, and that was just a little bit ago. And so I asked, how would Buddhist monks be able to judge the authenticity of a person's story of oneness experience? If I were to say I had a oneness experience for an entire week, would that make me more qualified to speak on the subject? So as I'm asking there is, how do you clarify, how do you confirm or determine that someone had a oneness experience, or it is in fact a oneness experience, or what does that even mean? So I come from a place of just being curious and wanting to know. Perhaps Bronson has had some experience that maybe can add some sort of understanding to this topic. But I just to kind of analyze what he said, or assuming it's a he, Bronson, is a picture of a police officer from Scooby Doo with a big mustache. So Bronson starts out and says, wow, way too many individuals think they understand non-duality. So I think it's funny when Bronson writes that, it's kind of geared towards, including me into that statement. They say it's always here, it's not an experience, blah, blah, blah. And then Bronson goes on to say how it is an experience and how you can have the veil be removed. And then you understand that conceptually, but you understand it and it shifts your perception. So I guess what I would kind of say to that is, if as Bronson describes it as being a temporary experience of, at one point when Bronson was, what did I say? 11. And then at 49, it was much bigger experience that lasted 3 hours. So, I've heard other people talk about having a similar experience of losing the self, or the letting go of the ego for a temporary period of time. And then the personality, the ego, the separate self identity, the attachment comes back. after a period of time, and you're kind of re-immersed into the world of material, into the world of illusion, Maya, whatever you want to call it. So what happens there? So you have this um, epiphany, this enlightenment, oneness experience, and then all of a sudden you're brought back to Earth to live in the trenches with the rest of us. And at that point, you have the experience of that. And after, let's say, as Bronson says, 3 hours, it goes away. Um, what then? Doesn't that in itself become a concept? And so, what Bronson is saying is that it has a fundamental shift or change in your overall perception. But what does that mean when the personality, the ego comes back and you no longer are living in that state of being in that experience because it's temporary? Now your separate self has to struggle with this idea of knowing oneness, but not really believing it in the sense that it's not being personally experienced in the moment, because you have your um, normal everyday habits in place. You have your ego personality structures that are playing themselves out. Um, so, in that moment, non duality or oneness is a concept, I would say, because you not necessarily experience it in the moment. And so it begs the question, how do you maintain that experience for a longer period of time? How do you make oneness experience last longer? And the ultimate question is, how do you make that state of oneness permanent? How do you make it never end? How do we end pain and suffering, or the attachment to the separate self? It begs that question. And do I have an answer to that? I mean, because from uh, a typical human response to me as a person, I don't have that experience from moment to moment at all times, if that makes sense. So I do relate to what Bronson is saying. Um, in the sense that there are moments where all of a sudden there's this overwhelming, all encompassing peace or understanding, or there's a sense of connection to everything outside of the conceptual intellect, the ego mind. And in those moments, there's this um, understanding of the meaning or the concept of non-duality. But then that changes and shifts, and the mind, the magician mind takes over, and the trick of separation is manifested yet again. And so that's my experience when it comes to non-duality and quieting the mind and having some sort of state of experience. And so I do relate in the sense that I've had similar type of um, what's the right word, awakening experiences, oneness experience, but that shifts. And so how do you deal with that shift? I think that's what people familiar with this message struggle with, is understanding, well, I get it, I go to this retreat, or I watch this video, or I meditate, or I do this practice, or I just out of the blue I have this non-dual experience, this sense of awareness, and yet it goes away, like, and so now I miss it. It becomes a conceptual thing, and I want to get back to that because my mind took over, my thoughts are now tangible and believed. And so how do I get back there? And then you hear some speakers talking about no more thinking, no more thoughts. And, I would ask, like, what does that even mean, in a sense? Because does that mean we aren't able to form language, or we can't plan what we want to say, or we don't have an imagination, or we don't think in words? That's the beauty of abstract thought, is that we can, in a sense, apparently or seemingly separate from the present experience and thinking about the future, or look into the past, or plan, or um, wonder. And that's the beauty of the human mind, is having that ability to see things that are not there, and dream things that you could see manifest, and putting those ideas into practice and manifesting them in your life. So there's a whole other niche conversations of the secret, or the those types of manifestation, like, how do you manifest things in your life? How do I, do I meditate, or do I make a vision board, or do some sort of chanting or whatever? And, like, I want to manifest so I can, live my dreams, or make money, or find the perfect relationship, or whatever the needs or desire is. There's this attempt to achieve it through some sort of power of the self over reality. So that's kind of what ends up apparently happening in these discussions, is trying to figure out what all this means, and feeling confused. And that's a normal response, I think, because the truth of non-duality never shifts, never changes. And what it comes down to is, let's say you have this oneness experience, and now your perception has changed. And even if your ego and your personality, or whatever you want to call it, the habits of the self come back, there's this grounding, or a shift in perception of oneness. And it comes down to the idea of, being saved, or how do you save others? How do you awake others from the illusion or the dream? How do you help people escape from the matrix? That's, when you see through the veil of illusion, how do you help others to see through the veil? How do you lead them to the door that they have to walk through? How do you become the Morpheus to someone's Neo, or the Oracle to Neo? And what I think what non-duality is pointing to is, even if you see the illusion for what it is, you see the duality for what it is, you see the truth behind the apparent separation, and you can either have the desire or not have the desire to try to, uh, if you want to say, wake people up, or help people come to this epiphany, or this sense of awakening, by whatever means, whether it's through conversation, or meditation, or yoga, or any other practice, shadow work. So try to lead them to more truth, and to see themselves for what they are, see the ego for what it is, as a temporary construct that we habitually hold up. But at the end of the day, non-duality essentially is saying that, regardless of whether you are in this oneness experience, or you had it before and now your perception has shifted, it makes no difference, because the illusion is that you are somehow not free, or that you are somehow not part of the oneness, or that you are not one of God's children. However you want to describe the connection that we all have in what is in reality. And by having these oneness experience or awakenings, you see you can call it divinity, or the freedom, or the emptiness, the empty fullness that everything in life um, ex- holds or is, or you know, you see the beingness in everything. And whether or not someone falls for the illusion or is living in a dream state or is deceived or whatever, the truth of the reality of yourself and others is the same. And so when you see through the veil and you see the oneness, you see that people that are living in the lie, that are living in delusion or illusion, it's simply that they're living in the dream world, and there's no need for them to necessarily wake up to change the reality of what is. So that, to me, is the what non-duality is pointing to. It's not so much worrying about what oneness experience is, what it looks like, how you get there. It's um, seeing things for what they are, which doesn't really make sense. So even if you don't believe it, or you believe that, others are somehow not awake, and that um, you have this ultimate shift of perception, it matters not to the reality of the truth of non-duality. And non-duality essentially is just a description of life, the face of God. All right, we have a comment from Chris Langevelt. Chris says, Russ, from what I gather, you don't have the answer to the question. How do I stay there? What I understand from this video so far is that you can't. That's well put, Chris. I like that. So let's unpack that. Let's see what we can get from that. So how do I stay there? What I understand his video is that you can't. So I think I've said this in other videos, is non-duality does a wonderful job, even though um, it's a way to describe what is. It's not something that can be put into practice necessarily. But through these conversations, through this attempt at understanding what non-duality is teaching, there is this idea of questioning our experience. And I think from a practical standpoint, I like Byron Katie and her 4 questions. She calls it the work about, and the questions are, and I'll probably paraphrase a little bit. Is this true? Is the first question. And the second question is, do I know if this? Can I be sure that this is ultimately true? And the third question is, how do I feel when I believe the thought? And the fourth one is, who would I be if I didn't believe this, or without this thought, essentially? And so what I like about non-duality is when you talk about duality, when something appears to manifest, it always comes with an opposite, essentially. And so when you talk about up, it assumes the down. When you talk about life, it assumes the death, left and right, and all the opposites that we discuss, good and evil. When we talk about one, it implies the other one. So you can't have one without the other, like love and marriage. And so when I see questions like, um, how do I stay there? What I understand from this video is that you can't. Um, I think you're onto something is when you say, what I gather is you don't have the answer to the question. And I think that's true, but I think the value of your questions is to use that as a mirror, to use that as a way to understand what you're trying to get out of this, what you're seeking, what you're desiring, what it is that you are really trying to achieve in this whole thing that we call non-duality. Because if non-duality doesn't give us anything or teach us anything, or it's not something that we can become because we already are what it's describing, we are the oneness. uh, Siempre somos libres. So we are already free. Um, we are always free, I guess is what I said. But um, it'd be ya somos libres. So there's nothing that we can do to get there. But what we can do is when with Byron Katie's the work is we can put something on paper, which is Chris putting a chat down, which to some extent, takes a lot of courage to put yourself out there, especially if you're a shy person to make a statement or ask a question that, you know, does the does the non-dual guru, which I'm assuming you probably don't see me in that respect, but let's say you do. Let's say I'm Tony Parsons or uh, what's his name, the other guy, Rupert Spira, who are the masters, the thought leaders of non-duality. Um, you may have a little bit of apprehension to ask a question because you want to sound dumb or you want to appear like you're not elevated to their level or that you haven't awakened or you're not really non-dual or something. But the having the courage to ask those questions and you put it down on paper or you type it on a computer is now you have something that you can look at. You've manifested something that you can and hold up and say, what is this? So how do it's like when Seraph in the Matrix says you don't know someone until you fight them. It's like how do you see through the illusion if you don't call out the illusion? So um, from a spiritual standpoint, if you want to call it that, knowing thyself, time nask, the purpose of that is to see through the veil of the self. And so, how do you separate or unattach from the attachments to the self if you don't understand the attachments, if you don't see the self for what it is? So, if there is a process to non duality, if there is a way to find forgiveness, is to put yourself out there, to hold yourself up and say, this, who is this? Who am I? Then you'll have something that you can say, I am not that. So if you don't say I am, point to the duality, then how do you say I am not that? So when you ask the question, how do I stay there? What I understand from this video so far is that you can't. By asking if it's not even possible, what does that mean? Trying to find meaning in this, then you can turn that mirror on yourself and ask yourself, why do I want to know? What's the meaning of the questions in and of itself? What am I getting out of asking these questions or trying to understand this? What am I ultimately seeking? So you hold up what you're seeking and you can understand that and understand where that is um, pointing to the attachments that maybe you are dealing with. All right, we got JK. JK says, when we think from a mindset of non duality, where do we put our mental energy to manifest more of it? I'll read that one more time. JK says, when we think from a mindset of non duality, where do we put our mental energy to manifest more of it? Hmm. That's a good segue into I thought of an example, kind of an analogy or metaphor for uh, this type of a question, as far as um, how do we become freer? How do we let go of the things that we are holding on to, the attachments that we have? And it comes from my personal experience. But let's say that you are about to go into someone's yard that's got a fence around it. And as you look over the fence that you're about to jump, you see that there's uh, parts in the grass where there's yellow spots and it's worn. And you see that there's, you know, dog poop in the yard. And so you're pretty sure that there's a dog somewhere that lives in the vicinity. So the question that you have is, is there a dog door? So if I go jump over this fence, is the dog going to become running out of the house, or is the dog in the yard somewhere that I can't see? And I jump over this fence. What am I going to do if it's a big dog that looks angry and wants to attack me? And so you jump over the fence and immediately look around. You have an awareness of your surroundings. You're in the moment because there's maybe some endorphins, or you got your blood pumping because there's potential danger in the immediate vicinity. So you're not thinking about in that moment what you're going to have for dinner that night, or you're not worried about that thing that you said yesterday that you feel guilty about. You're in the moment, fully embodied in the yard with a fence around you, wanting to know if there's a dog that's going to come and attack you, bite you. And so as you meander into the yard, you want to know where the exits are. So you want to be able to know, can I get away if this dog runs up on me? Can I get away quick enough? And because that's the ultimate reaction. So then, if you relate that to, I'll relate that to myself personally, is the idea of how, let's say, a type 5 on the Enneagram, or someone that uses their mind as self-defense, uses their thought process to deflect, or escape, or defend from what life presents. So if you have a experience that's stressful, or you create your own sense of anxiety, or there's danger, the uh, defense mechanism in that situation is to retreat up into the head, up into the mind, and try to figure out the solution, or try to understand a way to protect yourself. And so the focus becomes shifted to mental energy. The energy of the self gets focused on the thoughts, or the mind, to peer into the future, to plan ahead, or to think back into previous experiences, to know, you know to inform on how I can best handle the situation. But the not to get too much into the Enneagram, but the type 5 is the internal thinker, and it is um, moving away from life. So it is a retreat from life, versus being confrontational, or trying to bring. So in this analogy of the dog, it would be more of bringing a stick, or some sort of weapon, or pepper spray, to be able to ultimately defend yourself against this dog, because you're going to have a confrontation. And the other triad, if you will, is more of the lines of moving towards, or that would be like bringing treats or something, or a dog toy to distract the dog, so you can get away, but it's giving the dog something it wants. It's more of a proactive, positive approach, and that's a simplification. But so that's the analogy of how the separate self or the personality can operate or manifest. But the other side to that is, let's say you are walking up to a house, you're going through the backyard, and you see there's a dog that seems pretty mean, and it's on a chain. But as you walk up to it, there's nowhere to go. So, like, dogs are fast. If the dog runs up on you and the chain or the leash or whatever doesn't hold and it breaks, you're pretty much out of luck as far as your escape, because it's, especially if it's like in an open area, there's really nowhere to run, and if you do run, you're not going to outrun the dog. And so in that moment, but let's say you have to go through that area for whatever reason, so retreating is not an option. So your best option, your best defense, is to be present in that moment and to proactively understand that you're going to have to defend yourself, much like, let's say, a type 8 on the Enneagram. You're going to have to be aggressive or assertive against the dog in whatever way that seems appropriate in the moment. Because if the leash or the chain breaks and the dog comes after you, maybe there's a way that you can intimidate the dog, and so it doesn't ultimately attack. But if it's an aggressive dog, you're going to have to do something to defend yourself. So there's really no turning away. You're forced into dealing with life. You're forced into handling the situation because there's no escape. And in that moment, you have to be ready for anything. And so what could happen in that moment is the dog could break the chain and start attacking you. And let's say you have pepper spray or a stick or whatever, but the dog is a big dog and you fail, and the dog, injures you in a severe way. Or the flip side to that is that the dog comes at you, grabs onto your pant leg, and you take care of it and you hit it with a stick or whatever. I'm not advocating violence toward dogs, but in those moments, it's kind of you or him to a large extent. And you need to defend yourself in order to protect you as an individual. And so maybe you don't hit it with a stick, but you spray it with pepper spray, which maybe is temporary, as far of an annoyance for the dog, and the dog runs away. But that's where I think people want to have a sense of understanding or a sense of knowing, um, how to deal with life, because they don't want to end up being a dog's chew toy. And then people take the message of non-duality and say, well, there is no dog, there is no person. The self is an illusion. The dog is an illusion. We should just let the dog chew us up, attack us, rip our throats out. Not to be, that's kind of a little violent, so I apologize. But, attack us fatally, let's say, because that's what dogs do. It's like, well, okay, where's the wisdom in that? Where's the um, justice for the victim in that circumstance? Because why should we allow a dog to attack a human being? Why is that a good thing? Just because the dog wants to do it? But if there is no self, why should we protect ourselves? Why should we defend ourselves? Why should we have boundaries? We should just let the dog, let the aggressor, let the abuser come into our lives and take advantage of us to hurt us, to lie about us, to steal from us, or whatever you want to say. And then people want to know, how do I deal with this? How do I handle this? Because I don't want to be the chew toy. What non-duality is ultimately teaching is that whether or not our attempts at handling or dealing or having control over life works out in our favor, whether we successfully defend ourselves and it's a win-win if the dog goes away unharmed as well. That would be the prime outcome. But how can we guarantee that? Because we don't know what's going to happen. So in the moment, in a crisis situation, we can be prepared, but ultimately, as I like to say that word, we have to deal with what's in front of us, and we don't have control over the consequence. And so we try to do this, idea of you know using our mental energy to manifest more of a non-person, or more of a letting go, as a way to be more successful in life, or to be more um, authentic or essential, which is part of what it means to be human. But we have no control over what happens. So I may have good intentions, but I may fail at the end. And so we want to know in a lot of ways, because we don't want to fail. We don't want to lose, and at the end of that is we don't want to die. And so the separate self, or the ego, wants to um, avoid or master death, and it does that by creating more of itself, creating more of the illusion, more of the idea of death in and of itself. And I think there was a couple sayings that I thought were helpful on this matter, and one is from Charles Stanley. He's I think a Baptist, or he was a Baptist preacher. I think he's still alive in Georgia, I believe. But apparently he was quoted as saying, "Obey God and leave all the consequences to him." And so we can do our best. We can try to do what we do. We can practice what we preach. We can live authentically. Um, but at the end of the day, we don't have control over the consequence. And what does that do for us? Knowing that we don't, we can be more open and honest, or um, in the moment, more available to what is, because we know that we can do our best, but we have no control over the future. And that helps us to free ourselves from that need, if it's necessary. Or the saying, "Let justice be done, though the heavens fall." And so that's, kind of more of a Kantian approach versus utilitarian and utilitarianism, as far as um, doing things for the rightness of the action, for the justness of the action, doing right because it's the right thing to do, versus doing an action because of a certain outcome or something you want to achieve. But sometimes the right thing to do, or in a lot, I don't know if in all cases, but um, the right thing oftentimes does include the the um, the most benefit for the most amount of people, or for the greater good, if you will. So doing the right thing oftentimes is for the greater good, but I think from human perspective, sometimes we don't see the forest for the trees. We don't understand that. So we think something's the right thing to do because we can't see the future. We can't see the consequence of our actions. And so if we focus so much on the consequences of trying to do something to achieve something for the greater good, then we may lose sight of the rightness of the action, of the principle of the action in and of itself. And so we get lost in that, because oftentimes the right thing to do may be uncomfortable. Maybe you don't see how it will produce its fruits. You don't see how it will benefit. And it's just, I think, Jesus Christ is the prime example of that, of sacrificing himself for um, all of us, essentially. And it wasn't something, I guess it's not a pleasant experience, to put it lightly, to be crucified. So sacrificing yourself for as from the self's perspective doesn't seem very appropriate or warranted. Like, why would I want to lose myself in this moment? Why would I want to die? How would that serve? Because it doesn't serve me, you know. So how do you serve others, but also yourself, especially if you don't want to lose yourself? So what I mean by that is doing the right thing can often be the uncomfortable thing, or the choice that is the most difficult, the road less traveled. And you may not see the benefit of your actions even in your own lifetime. Like I was talking about, what's his name in a previous video? I can't think of his name, but it's one of those things where you have people, or like painters, where artists, they are poor and they die poor and they don't get the recognition in their own lifetimes, but then years later, decades later, they're recognized as for the talent and inspiration that they have. And so even though they personally don't experience that recognition, um, it still is the benefit to humanity, essentially. But to answer your question, JK, a little bit more specifically, taking the long way around, when we think of from a mindset of non-duality, where do we put our mental energy to manifest more of it? This gets into more of the idea of consciousness or awareness, or however we define that. Because when you have an experience of oneness, there's still the 3D perception, unless I guess you're meditating or something. But in an everyday experience, in an alpha beta state of mind, there is a 3D world that appears to be in front of us. I have a hand, here's a mic, here's a shirt, here's a dresser. You can point to anything that you are, if you're able to visibly see, as something that's apparently manifesting. So even when we have those experiences, the concept, or the relation to reality, is still from an awareness of the self, of this body mind mechanism. So oftentimes, like I was saying, with the way my personality works, or my ego structure works, is the focus goes out of the body and into the mind. It goes upstairs to the ivory tower. And so the focus is on the thought, the mind, the concept, the belief. So that's where the energy goes. So where Where the mind goes, the energy flows. Is that the saying? So, how do you have more of a non dual perspective? If you want to define it as focusing less on your thoughts or quieting the mind, then the energy could be focused more in the body through meditation or physical activity, or just, when I say put your energy on your right big toe. So, focus on your right big toe and feel that. What does that feel like? What is that experience? Now you're hearing my words, but your concentration, your focus is on your big toe. And so I guess, there is no mindset of non-duality essentially, in a way. But if what you're seeking is a quieting of the mind, there are practices that you can do to shift your focus from the habitual um, way that you maybe focus your attention or your consciousness, your awareness. But like I said, whether or not you believe non-duality or the concept of non-duality, or whether or not you are manifesting some sort of idea of oneness experience, that changes nothing about what is. Non-duality is a scam, says, "Good morning, sirs. How do you know we're all sirs? We could be senoritas or senoras." Um, Scam says, "A mindset implies effort, conflict, pretense, charade, or inauthentic. Energy flows where attention goes." Yeah, I think I said that. Um, a mindset implies effort, conflict, pretense, a charade, or inauthentic. Yeah, I guess what I would say to that is seeing the mindset or the mind or the thought process for what it is. It's, I think, the attachment to the mind, the mindset, um, that maybe can be um, create suffering, is believing it to be the ultimate truth, or believing it to be what it is not, or believing it to be ultimately real, versus seeing it for what it is. Because there's, the mind through creation of meaning is understanding your place in the world, understanding yourself versus others. Because without separation, without self and other, without existence, without life and death or good and evil, there is no meaning and there is no purpose. And so, from that perspective, you lose all meaning. But from a mindset, that's its function, its existence, the medium of energy itself, like you said, implies all of that to some extent. But I think, um, in a sense, it's an illusion or it's inauthentic. But there is also, it's like the idea of real and unreal. It's both real and unreal, and so it is an illusion. It is a pretense, but it is what it is. So seeing it for what it is, I think, is, um, I don't know. Scam says, "A mindset is a way of thinking after you have attached yourself to a belief system." Yeah, but I would say to that, I think I said this in the last video, is um, attaching yourself to your um, separation or your belief in separation has already happened before your mindset even becomes activated or even becomes in place. Because if you notice, I think that's one of the things that I maybe bring to the table in these conversations is an observer of my mind, of my thought processes, to be able to see or describe the illusion or the magician's trick that's presented by the mind, by the intellect, whatever you want to call it, the thinking. And so your reaction, so if you think of it like in this way, if someone uh, comes up behind you and you know stabs you in the back, so you get stabbed in the back, you didn't see it coming, you weren't expecting it. The moment that the knife pierces your your body, it certain sends nerves, which takes a really short period of time to reach your mind, and you have an experience of that uh, s- stabbing pain. But your body oftentimes will react before you're even aware of the stabbing in itself. It's kind of like the instinct of the body being quicker than the mind. And so you don't have to think, I should jump out of the way of the car, or ow, that hurts, being stabbed in the back. It just happens prior to your mental chatter or your opinion of it or even your awareness of it. So the time it takes, the nerves have already gone to your brain. You're not even aware of it, but you're already subconsciously, you're unconsciously aware of what's happening. And then your story, your mental chatter happens after the fact. And it's always way late in the game where you're aware of it. So oftentimes in these types of talks about non-duality, we focus the solution on how do we fix the mental chatter? How do we fix the story or what comes after the attachment to what happens? Like, so when we look at the ego or the separate self, we're looking at it conceptually or abstractly from the mind. The attachment has already happened. So now we're just commenting on it, and we think we can do more commentary or try to fix the story that we're talking about or try to get rid of a story in order to get rid of that attachment. But it's just like, the animal kingdom, if you will. They don't necessarily need a story to the mother bear doesn't need a story to protect its young. The deer doesn't need a story to run away from a wolf. You know, it so the instinct is there. The mind is just kind of commenting on it. But what we do in these talks oftentimes is just focus on how do we quiet the mind? How do we quiet the story or change the story or let go of the story? Um, the illusion of that in order to find peace. But I guess understanding that the attachment is in place prior to your intellect, your mind, your abstract thought can be helpful into avoiding the trap, I guess, of putting all of your energy into the mind itself to release of that mental energy somewhere else. Because the magician's trick, the mind is always changing. It's always it's like a chameleon. It wants to maintain control. It wants to be the forefront of your identity, your attachment. So it's constantly coming up with ways to maintain your focus on it, on your separate self. And so when the biggest one of the biggest ways that it does that is to focus on the identity, the attachment itself of the mind. And so it's more of itself. So it tries to escape from the attachment by becoming more attached. It's a catch 22 of trying to be um free from the separate self as a separate self. I think Paul Hederman does a really good job of explaining that in his talk. So I really like when he says that. Scam says, what I notice is that most people are all in various mindsets, shifting from one delusion to another. Many of those reactions are built into your spinal cord, so the feeling literally do not reach your brain before reaction is initiated. We think about what happened, and then we confuse that with thinking for reality. And then Scam says, chameleon, brilliant. Totally. I love when you say things I say that are brilliant. Just makes me feel good. Which I do want to read one other comment to stroke my ego a little bit. Let's see. Let me pull this up here. Nathaniel Peterson says, in talking about my non-duality and loving yourself live talk I did a few weeks ago, Nathaniel says, this was raw and well articulated, easily one of your best videos. And then Nathaniel also says, your impression of a non-duality speaker at 22 minutes, 1 second is gold. How's that for you? I love it. I love the praise, I'm a human being. Oh, Martin, welcome. Martin Peniak says, why does it want to maintain control? What is it that wants? Thanks. What is it that wants? So what is it that wants to maintain control? I mean, that's the function. And, this gets into psychology and human behavior and all that whole realm of discussion is, part of the function of existing as a living being, a sentient being, is to try to survive. There's the base level of attachment or focus is to maintain your existence, essentially. And why is that? It's kind of like, what's the meaning of life? What's purpose? You can get into, chicken or the egg kind of discussions, but from a functional, pragmatic standpoint, it's an avoidance of death. It's an avoidance of the void, of elimination, of not being, of being destroyed. And so there's this ways that the mind works to maintain that. So from a reptilian brain, a instinctual level, there's ways that we use that. If you look at how animals defend themselves, or instinct to protect themselves from predators and that sort of thing, or from starvation or the elements in nature, there's ways they develop poisonous skin, or build nests up high, or there all sorts of ways. Squirrels bury nuts just in case there's you know they come upon hard time to find food. You can find that all across the natural world, and that's part of the process of maintaining the self, if you will. Why that is, why is one of the most astute questions to ask. But from a human standpoint, the attachment, the mind, the intellect, the ego structures um, have a similar purpose as far as maintaining reality, or avoiding death, or avoiding fear, or dealing with fear, separation. And it does that in different ways, but the main focus is maintaining identity. So it's not so much um, a doing versus a conceptualization of life as a way to protect itself. So um, if you can look at it this way, the the human being maybe fears the death of the ego, the death of the self, way more than it fears the death of the body. Like an animal, let's say, and I'm simplifying obviously, but the animal may want to avoid physical death, whereas it's scarier for maybe a human being to, and there's the physical death too, but it's maybe a bigger deal or a bigger issue for humans to avoid the death of the identity. And so that's where, we build up what it means to go to heaven or the afterlife. That becomes a focus, existential type discussions where we want to know what happens after we die, because we're not so much worried about dying the physical body. It's just more of maintaining the self. So the question I always have is, so let's say I Russ Wrap, this guy goes to heaven. What does that even mean? Do I have a body? Do I have um, a mind? Am I still the schmuck that I am now? Or am I this perfect person now that I'm like an angel because I, evolved into the heavenly realms? And, so then we have discussions about that. So that's where I think, um, from a functional standpoint, that's what the mind or the self does. Scam says people like us never get praise. Laugh out loud. Sure. Scam says there is what appears to be a foreign installation in the mind which dominates and uses a cunning deception to maintain control over us, conceals what goes on inside us, the chameleon. Yeah, the chameleon or the snake, the serpent. Yeah, so I mean, that's one way you can look at it, is to say, I have these thoughts, I have these beliefs. And if you question, like, are these even mine? Where do these come from? Why do I believe this? It makes you kind of wonder who you are, which I think is beneficial. So this is a good discussion. We're not well over an hour, but we're about an hour and 12 minutes here. So I'm going to wrap it up. But I did want to, and I'll put this in the description. I thought I connected with this video, and I think you should check it out if you want to. It's you may be familiar with Jordan Peterson, however you want to define him. He's been more well known the last few years. But this video from Pursuit of Meanings, I'm not familiar with the channel, but I just came across it. I think YouTube recommended it, but it was Jordan Peterson's incredible journey to God, heartbreaking moments on his faith. I think, especially I think he's more of a skeptical mind, similar to myself. And so I relate to what he says in that video. And so if you struggle with this whole idea of non-duality, he doesn't really specifically talk about non-duality. He talks about God and religion, and he's a man after my own heart. So I think it's beneficial. I'll put it in the description of this video, just specifically. But that's the name of the video. You can check that out. And any last thoughts before we go? Type them in the chat. But I did want to read. I think this is relevant to the conversation from the Bible, from the book of Joshua. And it is Joshua chapter 1, verses 6 through 9. Joshua chapter 1, verses 6 through 9. And it says, "Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their forefathers to give them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Do not let this book of the law depart from your mouth. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." The word of God. Martin says, amen. Amen to you, Martin. Any other quick comments? Otherwise, we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you for joining. Thank you for participating. If you're just jumping on, I think we had a good discussion. So if you're gonna go take a walk on the treadmill or outside or do the dishes and you want something to listen to, you know, this is not a polished podcast, but it's I think a good conversation to have. So you can check that out. And, YouTube recognizes that as more watch time. So maybe my videos will go out to a larger audience. Martin says, "What's the meaning of life?" Ha ha ha. Very funny. Scam says, "Have a nice day, man." It is funny though that you say men. Like there may be other people that are of the feminine persuasion that watch this. I know we've had people participate in the chat before, but it does seem from some of the other channels that I've seen over the few years here is that it does kind of the conceptual, intellectual conversation of this topic kind of gear more towards masculine persuasion, if you will. So it is interesting. It's more of a abstract conversation, which maybe appeals to a certain audience, but I could be wrong. I don't know. But anyway, have a good one, and we may or may not do this again sometime. So, oh, by the way, Martin says, hold on. Martin says, "I am a man identified as a woman, lesbian." Okay. So before we go, everyone that's still on board here, the handful of people that are still watching, go check out my the Big Lie of Non-Duality video, my latest upload video. So you may have to listen to it 5, 10, 20 times just to really grasp the wisdom in it. But I'm trying to like I said at the beginning of the video, I told my son that it's gonna be like the top 3 of my it probably won't beat the best method video, but I think it's gonna be in the top 3. And so that's my plug. Maybe I'll put that in the description too. Oh, no, non-duality says, Scam says, "I can't see Martin's comments." Yeah, I don't know. I read them so you can hear them. I don't know how that works. Maybe he's got it on like a private setting or something. And Martin says, "You didn't miss much, man." So, all right. Well, thanks for joining. And until next time, peace.